rare and balanced view on politics in today's world. Based on facts, born of rationality, common sense, and logic, providing context on today's events, this is American Perspective with Rick Thomas.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to American Perspective. I am your host, Rick. Well, you know, with all this talk about pardons and the leftists are like, hey, if Biden's going to pardon his son Hunter, why doesn't he pardon, Fauci and pardon all of the Democrats and pardon everybody who isn't a conservative and pardon this person and pardon that rock and that tree and, you know, the universe, I guess. Anyway, that's because they they want him to pardon everything. But anyway, so we're going to talk about that tonight. Yeah. So I've done some research. I've done some digging. I've also referred to things like the Anti-Federalist Papers. Of course, the Federalist Papers, as well as James Madison's notes of debates of the Federal Convention, which is the Constitutional Convention, as well as several other law reviews, law articles, etc., etc., etc. We've got all kinds of things that are, you know, it seems to be a pretty popular topic, at least today, because it's been a while since we've actually had a presidential pardon publicized as well or as big as this one has been. So we're going to cover that tonight. And also, too, because normally I would do this for tomorrow because it came in as a question of the week by two separate people. And normally I would do it on Saturday night, but tomorrow is the annual Christmas gift discussion with my good old friend Captain Unicorn. He'll be coming back, and we will be discussing gifts and different things about Christmas for tomorrow. So you'll definitely want to come in and join for that. Sometimes it gets hilarious and things like that. So anyway, all right. So, let's go ahead and get things started off. Tonight's, Pledge of Allegiance is going to be led by definitely not Karen, over on Rumble. So if you would please, if you do not mind, please stand, remove your hat if you're wearing it, or wearing one, I should say, and, place your hand over your heart and join in with definitely not Karen in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And, of course, I thank definitely not Karen for submitting that. And, yes, 3 Chevy points out definitely not Karen is definitely not over on Rumble tonight. But anyway, moving on. If you would like to hear your rendition of the Pledge of Allegiance played here on the program, all you need to do is record yourself reciting the pledge in your style. Whether it's a audio file or video file, that's fine. I'll take both of them. I just stripped the audio off of the video, and that's what I use. So take that, attach that file to an email, and send it off to fans, F-A-N-S, at americanperspective.online. That's fans, F-A-N-S, at americanperspective.online, and I will go ahead and get you into the rotation order for that. Tonight's headline sponsor, is totally fitting. I know I did them last night, but I'm going to do it again because it fits for all of this. It is IOTC, the Institute on the Constitution, was established in 2004 as a 501c3 nonprofit with one singular mission, and that is to restore the constitutional republic through grassroots education. All courses and materials are developed using primary source documents and taught from the American view of law and government as defined in the Declaration of Independence in the following 3 key points. 1, there is a God. 2, our rights come from him. And 3, the purpose of civil government is to protect and secure our God-given rights. The IOTC offers the opportunity to educate yourself on our most precious founding document, the Constitution of the United States. They also provide tools to educate your community and get involved with local government. Start by taking their free U.S. Constitution course and go from there. Use my affiliate link, iotc.americanperspective.online, to sign up. And while you are there, take a moment to look through their other course material and information. My affiliate link, once again, is iotc.americanperspective.online to get great content to learn about our historical founding and support the show in the process. That's iotc.americanperspective.online. Or, if you just want to purchase this fabulous Saddleback leather-bound U.S. Constitution to support the show, go to constitution.americanperspective.online. Take a look at this thing. It's 1/8 of an inch of Saddleback leather wrapped around pages that are water and tear resistant. They didn't do cheap glue here, folks. They stitched the binding all the way through the leather to the outside. All of the pages secure inside. They have a 100-year warranty against materials and workmanship defects, such that if something goes wrong, you send this thing back and they will either fix it or replace it for free. It is buddy tested, buddy approved, Billy tasted, Billy approved, and my youngest whiskey warrior has decided, or found out, or confirmed, I should say, has confirmed that the information contained within will get you your civics badge in the Scouts. Go to constitution.americanperspective.online and get yours today. Great stocking stuffer. Still time to get it before Christmas. You might want to get it right now. Okay? So let's go ahead and do that. And also, while you are there, check out the rest of the Institute on the Constitution's products and services. And of course, I thank them for allowing me to be an affiliate. All right, folks. Couple of things first off, in terms of some news that popped before we get into our main main topic here. First of all, in the Daily Mail, apparently there was a JL Partners poll that polled a little over 1,000 registered voters for their views on Joe Biden. And that poll found that Biden was less impressive than Jimmy Carter. Now, for those of you that don't know, Jimmy Carter was well known by a lot of people. I mean, he was, a nice guy. Just a nice guy. Horrible president. And actually, it was because of Jimmy Carter and his policies and his disastrous things that he did, namely the Iranian embassy, and also we can't forget the economy and all of that stuff. That was brought him to his knees, essentially, and caused for a trade out to Ronald Reagan in 1980. Now, the poll result also makes him worse in minds of voters than Richard Nixon, who was forced to resign rather than face impeachment over the devastating Watergate scandal. And by the way, Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon for that role. And so there we go. We'll be explaining that in a minute. But that being said, 1,006 registered voters were asked to rank the last 9 presidents in order from best to worst, and Biden, of course, came at the very bottom of the table, making him the worst in 47 years. some 44% placed him as one of the worst two, while only 14 actually placed him in the top two, giving him a net score of 30 points underwater, which was worse than Nixon, who came out with a negative 25. Donald Trump came out with a negative 15. So James Johnson, who was the co-founder of JL Partners, who conducted the poll, called it a diabolical result for Joe Biden. So here is here is the poll results. Let me see if I can get it a little bit bigger for you here. Yeah, there we go. So you can see, oops, let me try and scoot this down just a slight tad rather than a whole thing. All right. So here you can see Ronald Reagan topped the top of the list. He had a plus 30. Barack Obama came in second at plus 21. Bill Clinton at plus 17. George W. Bush came in at plus 1. Jimmy Carter was a even 0. George H.W. Bush, who was the one that followed Reagan, he was Reagan's vice president. He came in at a negative 1. Donald Trump came in at negative 15. Richard Nixon came in at negative 25. And, of course, Joe Biden all the way down to the bottom at negative 30. So apparently we pretty much, or at least 1,000 people, they can add me into it too. I personally, I mean, I've definitely made it clear on this program, Ronald Reagan to me in terms of modern history is the best president that we have had in terms of modern history, and possibly even one of the best in history. I wouldn't have put Barack Obama up that high. But then again, considering the fact that you have Obama, Clinton, Bush, Carter, and Nixon, all part of that same grouping, 47 years worth. Yeah, I wouldn't have put Barack Obama in number two slot, but that's okay. It's just me. Anyway. All right. So, also too, wanted to let you guys know that according to the New York Post, Daniel Penny, now you remember I was talking to you about him last night. Daniel Penny's trial judge has agreed to drop the top manslaughter count after the jury deadlocks twice. Now, they deadlocked in terms of getting a unanimous verdict. They didn't really specify how big it basically it had to be unanimous is what it is. And so essentially what ended up happening is they deadlocked because they could not get a unanimous decision twice in that top charge, the top manslaughter charge. And so because of that, it's now been dropped. Now, because it's been dropped, okay, that means that the prosecution can still go after him, by the way. Also, too, don't forget the fact that he also has a couple of civil trials that are going to come after his criminal trial. One of them being the father who apparently abandoned the gentleman, the mentally ill gentleman who died, who had so many drugs in his system and stuff. But anyway, that individual, his dad left him at an early age and has now filed a wrongful death suit against Daniel Penny in civil court. So we'll just have to kind of see. I mean, this isn't going to be, this isn't going to go away anytime soon. Okay. Just to put that out there. Also, too, it's kind of funny how the left has been, and yeah, Bonnie, I agree. Bonnie says that he is looking for money, meaning the father. The father's looking for cash. That's exactly what he's doing. Not being a part of the kid's life, and then all of a sudden showing up when the guy, when he gets, I mean, It's despicable. People do that all the time. They're just looking for cash. It just sucks. But anyway, going back to this next article really quick, in the Epic Times. So apparently tariffs and the threat of tariffs actually do work to the consternation of the left. Here in the Epic Times, Mexican officials make a record fentanyl seizure days after Donald Trump did his tariff warning. So he threatened, you'll recall, he threatened a 25% tariff against Mexico if it didn't act to curb illegal immigration and fentanyl trafficking. Also, too, you'll recall that the president of Mexico, she fired back with like, well, if you're going to put tariffs on us, we're going to put tariffs on you. Yeah, except she folded like an hour later because she immediately said, oh, yeah, well, we're going to hold off. We're going to hold the immigration trains. We're going to hold them here in Mexico. We're not going to let them get to your border. And now this comes out. So, folks, this seriously, I mean, this is the power of the tariff. It's not yes, it is a tax. Okay, we're not going to deny that. And if it did go into effect, then yes, it very well could have caused some serious problems. But the point of the tariff is not to implement the tariff. The point of the tariff is to use it as leverage to gain other policy changes within a country. And in specifics with Mexico, given the fact that we import more of their products than they import of ours, okay, it was a perfect scenario for us, because what that means is it would be a huge economic impact to Mexico if Americans stopped buying the products because of those tariffs. I don't want to go into a whole tariff thing. I've covered it enough already as part of the show earlier on, about a week or so ago in the episodes. But again, this is the result. This is the result of what is essentially what is supposed to be going on with the tariffs. Also, too, the House, now I don't even understand this. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think if we were to apply the Constitution in a strict sense, like I like to do, okay, I honestly, I would say this is something that the House shouldn't even be talking about. But that being said, the House overwhelmingly passes what's called the Crucial Communism Teaching Act. The legislation seeks to educate American youth on the dangers of communist and totalitarian ideologies by allowing survivors to tell their stories firsthand. So, yeah. Again, this isn't something, in my mind, this isn't necessarily something that is a constitutional mandate. The federal government doesn't really have a mandate of doing anything education-wise. That was specifically left out of the Constitution. It wasn't even one of the ones in Article 1, Section 8. So, again, I don't know. It just is one of those things that I'm not exactly... And again, I don't even know what it's really going to do either, because, by the way, I mean, the House passed it, but the Senate could probably, turn it down. So I don't know. It is, I mean, don't get me wrong. It's a good thing that American kids should learn about communism. That's one of the problems that we do have in this country, is that we are so far removed from some of the more, crucial historical events such as World War I, World War II, Vietnam, the Cold War, Korea, so on and so forth. We're now a couple of generations removed from those periods of time. Even I wasn't necessarily aware of, outside of the Cold War, wasn't really aware of a lot of the things that helped shape where America's modern history is. And so, yeah, I mean, I see where it's a good thing, but again, the strict constitutionalist in me is saying, yeah, this isn't really their business. So anyway, but all right. I mean, I'll accept it. I guess we kind of have to, at least until things start cleaning up. All right. So let's go ahead and get in, because this is a deep subject, and if I get too far gone within it, or if I finish it early, I'll have to obviously try and come up with something on the fly. But because, believe me, if you guys could see my screen over here, I have got tons of tabs open to discuss this. All right. But the last article that I have here, which is actually an opinion piece, this one is the Newsmax piece, where it's an opinion that talks about Biden's Hunter pardon proves that he's actually for himself and not the nation. And this is very true. Now, this is by Michael Dorstwitz. Yeah. Anyway, he's basically arguing the fact that the day after President-elect Trump announced that he was nominating lawyer investigator Kash Patel to serve as the next FBI director, President Biden, of course, immediately came out and made the startling announcement. His announcement, of course, was after repeatedly promising that he wouldn't pardon his son Hunter, stating that no one is above the law. He gave Hunter one of the most controversial pardons in memory. We're going to cover some of this. But to remind you of what the pardon is literally a blanket pardon of all crimes that Hunter Biden may have committed, both known and unknown, between the period of January 1, 2014, the year that Hunter began serving on the board of Burisma, while his father was vice president and in charge of the Ukraine policy, all the way up until December 1st of 2024, this year, which is basically 10 years and 11 months, almost 11 years. That same period also covered the time in which, in 2017, where Hunter himself, and the text messages from the laptop show this, that he was threatening Raymond Zhao, the executive of CEFC China Energy, which is a Chinese Communist Party run company, which pretty much all of them are. But anyway, to help remind you of this, Hunter told Zhao in these texts that he was sitting with his father, okay, and he was sitting with his father, and they would like to understand why the commitment made has not been fulfilled. According to a July 30th, 2017 WhatsApp message reported to Congress by IRS whistleblowers investigating Hunter's finances. Hunter told Zhao, "Tell the director that I would like to resolve this now before it gets out of hand," and now means tonight. And Z, meaning Zhao, "If I get a call or text from anyone involved in this other than you, Zhang, or the chairman, I will make certain that between the man sitting next to me and every person he knows, and my ability to forever hold a grudge, that you will regret not following my direction." Now, that is a direct quote. And that has, according to the writer, all the earmarks of a criminal shakedown. Now, Jonathan Turley, who, reminding you, is a law professor at George Washington University, basically stated that his call to a Chinese businessman hardly speaks to being an innocent, hounded by overzealous prosecutors. So, we also have to remember, too, that it wasn't just Hunter that was involved in this. His uncle Jim and his father Joe We're all a part of this. It was Joe's political influence that was being sold. Okay. And he was reportedly receiving, according to Tony Bobolinsky, reportedly receiving 10% of that as being called the big guy. All right. Now, to kind of get a grasp or an understanding as to how this relates to today. So all of that happened and occurred during the period in which Joe Biden has provided this blanket pardon to Hunter. Now, normally, pardons are typically very narrow in scope. They are usually directed at a specific charge or set of charges, and they are not a span of such a large block of time. Also, too, pardons usually come out at the very end of a president's term in office. Now, in this particular case, we are on the tail end, but you would usually see pardons start to come out, let's say, the first week or two of January. Okay? Because this occurred over Thanksgiving weekend, indicates that something else may have been going on with this entire particular piece. Namely, there is a strong possibility that Hunter, over turkey and pie and dressing and potatoes and whatever else the Bidens partook in over Thanksgiving, made an impassioned plea to his father and to his stepmother Jill about all of this. Well, anyway. Now, there may be more to it than just Hunter, okay? That Jim and Joe are also have exposure that could possibly have been the real catalyst behind it. Joe may be thinking, which is kind of hard because he's like, you know, kind of hard to like rub two brain cells together to even have a thought, realistically. But anyway, that Joe Biden may have done this in order to, in his mind, protect himself from any kind of prosecution that may have been coming into play with Kash Patel. Totally plausible. He also probably is thinking that, hey, if I pardon Hunter, Hunter won't be able to get in trouble. Therefore, he will keep his mouth shut and not testify against us. There's only one problem with that. And that is, it is generally accepted, and this is the first point of tonight's breakdown. It is generally accepted that if you accept the pardon, meaning that the president can issue it, but the individual has to accept it. If Hunter accepts the pardon, then he loses what is considered to be his Fifth Amendment ability to not answer, to incriminate himself, because of the fact that, I mean, he's already been pardoned, so it's not like he can't really explain anything to anyone. And so this is where it's going to get very interesting in the future. Should Hunter Biden actually, and I'm assuming he did, because he's not the smartest man in the room. He's definitely not the smartest man that Joe knows, even though Joe thinks that he's the smartest man that Joe knows. But the point here is that he loses his Fifth Amendment protections by accepting that. So if he gets called to testify and refuses to testify, by the way, he can get contempt of court charges given to him. And because the pardon was only up until December 1st of 2024, because you can't pardon for future offenses, which we'll soon find out here, that basically the entire situation might have made it now easier for somebody, a strong individual who is very resolved to go after Joe Biden for things like bribery and potentially treason. This is a very, very interesting situation. Now, the blanket pardon, such as it is, okay, in terms of the time limit that he's put on it, has only been used one other time in history. Well, that in terms of a blanket pardon from the idea, and let me clarify this because there are a couple of times where it's been used, but the taking the pardon and putting it as so broad and over such a large period of time has not been undertaken since Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon for all of the things that he may have done against the federal government during his period in office, with the idea that that would cover the whole Watergate scandal. Now, here's the thing. That particular pardon, meaning the Ford pardon of Nixon, was never challenged in court. And so we're not entirely 100% sure, if we're honest with ourselves, we're not even 100% sure that that particular pardon and the length of time and pardoning somebody for something that is unknown in this manner, whether or not it actually is constitutional. So these are some of the questions that we're going to answer tonight. So let me go ahead and get that going here. So let's go ahead and pull it off here for this question of the week. All right, and tonight's question of the week comes in both from Buddy Weiser as well as G. Both of them hit me up with almost the exact same questions, all right? So here's the question. So from Buddy says, since the general search warrant is unconstitutional, mainly because it doesn't specify the items being sought, approximate location, and the reason, how can a blanket pardon be allowed? Doesn't a specific illegal act need to be charged, adjudicated, found guilty, and sentenced before it can be forgiven? He's also saying that the pardon of Hunter Biden covers over a decade. How is that possible? And G followed along with that and said, presidential pardon power, can the president pardon people for things they have not been convicted of? Quote unquote, the blanket pardon? If so, he could just say, I pardon the whole Democrat Party. Bingo. It seems like that's what they are trying to do. So that was G's question. All right. In order to understand the pardoning power of the president, we have to go back in history. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, history. All right. But we need to understand what is going on, okay? The pardon power of the president actually began, all right? The pardon power of the president actually began as a part of English common law. Now, keep in mind that the king, all right, had unlimited power. In fact, in a monarchy, the king is basically held up, at least at the time, was held up to be understood that the king himself couldn't break the law. He just couldn't. He because of his position, he was essentially above the law. And having that particular position in that thought process, the sovereign was essentially the idea that they could then confer that power to pardon others from their offenses. Okay. And it was thought to be completely unlimited. Like, you know, there was no way, no limit could be held on that power. All right. So during the writing of the Constitution of the United States, the founders decided that it was a tool in the toolbox to ensure that shall we say, unjustly accused and convicted people could have the power of the pardon in federal offenses as a possibility to right, like, for an example, a rogue judge, okay, or a rogue jury, or something going on with the jury where they got bought off or whatever. And so they viewed it as a potential tool to be used sparingly as part of the ability for the judicial system to get corrected by the, in this case, the president under the federal system of justice. Now, at the time of the writing of the Constitution, several of the states already had this power invested in the government as a part of each state's founding documents. So it was not only the English common law reference and the reference back to the monarchy, but it was also generally practiced here in the states that the governors of those colonies and those states could in turn, because remember, the states, the United States of America was actually founded under the Articles of Confederation first for a few years before they turned to the Constitution of the United States, okay? Don't forget that. So many of the states already had this power invested into the executives of each state. And so therefore, it was generally believed that that the federal government should also confer that power to the executive, meaning the president, in terms of federal jurisprudence and power, okay? But not everybody thought that it should be completely unlimited. And in fact, as I was pointing out during the debates for the Federal Convention of 1787, okay, under James Madison, all right, there were questions with regards to this power. In particular, the anti-federalists, which were the opposition, okay, that in particular, the charge of treason should not be allowed to be covered by the president, and that it should be exempt from presidential pardon power. Well, the argument was made, Alexander Hamilton, Alexander Hamilton wrote about the power in Federalist number 74. And in Federalist number 74, as soon as I can find it, let's see, where did it go? Here we go. In Federalist number 74, he talks about the reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. So here, the principle came in that, for an example, a president can't go and pardon himself from an impeachment charge. This is where we start getting into the question as to whether or not Joe Biden can actually pardon himself for anything that he may have done, okay? The Constitution and the founders generally believed that the president himself would fall under, being president, would fall under impeachment first, then would get referred for criminal prosecution after he's been removed from office. And so, because of that, the general consensus is that the president is unable to pardon himself. However, that hasn't been completely clarified by the Supreme Court over time, because honestly, nobody has ever tried to do it. Even Richard Nixon didn't bother doing it. He resigned before impeachment even came even started up, and so he resigned first to try and avoid any of that embarrassment or even bringing that to the fold. But to get back to Federalist 74, Alexander Hamilton points out that the expediency, and this is a quote, the expediency of vesting the power of pardoning in the president has not been only contested in relation to the crime of treason. Now, this is, in particular, he's referencing the arguments that were going on during the convention. Okay, because remember, the Federalist Papers were written after the Constitution was presented to the states, and it was arguing several key points, depending upon who was writing it, whether it was Madison or Hamilton, in terms of advocating for the ratification of the Constitution. Okay, so anyway, he continues on. This, it has been urged, ought to have been dependent upon the assent of one or both branches of the legislative body, and that's what the Anti-Federalists were basically saying. He says, I shall not deny that there are strong reasons to be assigned for requiring this, in particular, the occurrence of that body. In other words, they were essentially discussing, with the advice and consent of the Senate, idea to be applied to pardoning over treason in particular. He says, as treason is a crime leveled at the immediate being of the society where the laws have once ascertained the guilt of the offender, there seems a fitness in referring to this expediency of an act of mercy towards him to the judgment of the legislature. And this ought the rather be the case, as the supposition is, of the connivance of the chief magistrate ought not to be entirely excluded. So here's, and what he's kind of referring to here is some of the arguments where essentially, well, what happens if a president gets into office, conspires with somebody else, thereby committing the crime of treason, say to overthrow the government as an example, and then pardons himself along with the other person in that crime. Now, to kind of save you a little bit from the old English, Hamilton basically says that to do that and not invest it completely in the presidency or in the office of the president itself as a one lone individual versus a vast body of people would be tantamount to not even having the pardon power to even exist. And that in Hamilton's mind, it's like, no, it as much as I understand the argument, it's better that we vest it in the idea of the one man who is, or in this case, the one man who is part of the executive branch, who is essentially the law above all others when it comes to the federal law, and that it should be vested specifically in that presidency without the advice of and consent of the Senate. Now, the only thing is, the only stipulation of that, again, goes back to the point of impeachment, which, as you recall, the power to bring impeachment charges resides in the House, and the power to try those charges and find the president guilty or not and remove him from power resides in the Senate. And that's how that works. Now, believe me, 74, or I should say Federalist Paper 74, has, let's see, four or five paragraphs total, depending upon how you count a paragraph, and 3 out of the 5 are tied directly to the power of the pardon. But again, keep in mind, the only objection that anybody had at the time to the power of the pardon had to deal with the charge of treason. And, of course, the impeachment. So it's apparently true that the founders didn't actually expect that the president, number one, would even act in such a way where he or she, in this case, would be corrupt. And this is one of the complaints that I actually have with the founders, is that the founders genuinely and generally believed that a man would do good. They believed that a man would act honorably. And this is why John Adams is known as saying, and I'm not going to quote him, but I'm paraphrasing here, that the Constitution is only fitting for a moral and religious people. Moral being in particular the idea that they are going to act with righteousness and justice and ethics and values and standards, rather than what we have now, which is essentially a president in power who has none of those. He lies, he cheats, he steals, plagiarizes. He's, in his daughter's own words, he's like, seen her naked and possibly hasn't had an incestuous relationship with her, sexualized her at an early age, so on and so forth. The founders would never have thought, and I'm claiming this as myself, the founders never would have thought that a man like that could have attained the office of the presidency. And so because of that, they did not bother to put on a bunch of chains and restrictions on the president in this particular way with the power, the clemency and, or I should say the reprieve and pardons power that they gave him. They felt that it would be utilized in a more stringent and judicious manner than what it actually is apparently going to be used in this particular case. Okay. So taking a look at that pardon power, all right, and the fact that it's been utilized, you got to remember the first time it was utilized was George Washington during the Whiskey Rebellion. He pardoned anyone who was part of that Pennsylvania Whiskey Rebellion. He pardoned, he didn't even know all their names. He just did a blanket pardon. Anybody who was a part of said act is hereby pardoned. Okay. Thomas Jefferson also used the power of the pardon in order to pardon anyone through the Alien and Sedition Acts. Let's see, it's been used, multiple times, but generally the times that it's been used, it was in reference to a specific event, a specific crime. And it wasn't until Gerald Ford issued the pardon on Nixon was it actually issued for a time period and not a specific item. Now, because that was never challenged in court, that does tend to set the precedent. However, the Supreme Court of the United States throughout history has upheld that the president has a near unlimited ability to pardon in pretty much any way that they so choose. There are only certain specific items that have been completely left off when it comes to the power of the pardon. So, settled law so far is that the scope of the presidential pardon is pretty well set in stone. In other words, it's relatively unlimited. However, you cannot pardon for future offenses. You cannot pardon for state or civil offenses. Okay? It is for federal offenses only. And other than that, it's pretty well wide open in terms of interpretation in terms of what's being used. So Jimmy Carter, as an example, pardoned Vietnam era draft evaders. Okay. So also pardons have been both called constricted or restricted, as well as being full pardons like what Biden did. They've been both. Restrictive pardons in history have basically said, hey, look, I'll grant you this pardon provided that you do X, Y, and Z and accept these on future behavior, for an example. Okay. Including submitting to some punishments that are, not otherwise provided by law, like any kind of fines or fees or, any other such stuff. All right. Now, it is also settled law that a pardon does not need to follow a conviction. It can be done preemptively. It can be issued before, during, or even after. All right. And the idea, and this is one of the arguments that was made with regards to the preemptive pardon at the Constitutional Convention, was the fact that a pardon, at least in Hamilton's view, was that a pardon could be utilized in order to gain information and favor such that you could go after, for an example, other more heinous and offensive crimes, and it could be used as sort of a carrot, if you will, to encourage someone to be able to testify against others, sort of like the idea of the immunity clauses that we have. Okay. It also, too, the idea of being able to do that also would, as well as be able to sort of tamp down uprisings of that nature if you offer presidential pardons for any of the offenses that may have been done. Abraham Lincoln did this in an attempt to keep certain individuals from joining in the Civil War and seceding from the Union. Now, it didn't work for him, but again, it's basically supposed to be a tool that could be used in order to encourage someone to potentially behave in the future with this no long out there. Now, also too, remember that a limit on the pardon is dealing with impeachment. So he can't pardon himself for anything that he might have been impeached for, which is why Trump can't pardon himself for that. Okay. Now, there are a couple of things that are not quite settled, meaning that it hasn't been questioned in the part of the Supreme Court. It also it isn't very clear in terms of the documentation that we have from both the Constitutional Convention as well as the Constitution itself. And that is whether or not a pardon needs to be clearly specific. And this is where we're getting into the Hunter Biden and the Nixon pardon too, by the way. 90% of the time, all right, the pardons specify a specific crime or act. Okay. So for an example, when President Trump pardoned Scooter Libby, Paul Manafort, George Papadopoulos, and Roger Stone, those were typical. Those were typical pardons. He targeted a specific crime and he referenced it specifically. Okay. And usually when it's put together, it's after the full and unconditional pardon, does the president go on and specify which statutes each one was charged with and violated and therefore described in detail the punishments that are being forgiven, whether or not it's, no punishment at all, or whether or not there was something else. Their pardons then are extend only to those named crimes and no other crimes that are available. Okay. But again, the only time realistically that we have in history that part has been left off was the Nixon pardon and now the Hunter Biden pardon. So there is a potential that it could be argued that the idea of the pardon has to be based upon some type of specific event, that it can't just be a blanket pardon like what Joe Biden has done. And this, to me, seems like a common sense application of a pardon power while still limiting it in the sense of that the president is not at the level of the king, which is what was partially argued as a part of the constitutional, the conventions, in terms of all that. So now, there is also the question, and this one is still unsettled: can the president pardon himself for crimes that are outside of impeachment? So that's kind of a question with that. Now, Nana of JJS asked this question: couldn't Hunter still be charged with non-federal crimes? Absolutely, he can. He can be charged with both state as well as civil. He can be brought into civil court for all of that. Okay. Now, again, going back to the idea of can the president pardon himself? They actually haven't had a federal case yet addressing this issue. Although Nixon's Office of Legal Counsel actually did talk about it. Now, again, this isn't a court. Okay. This isn't a court, but it's a Office of Legal Counsel addressed it and said that that the president, their opinion was the president couldn't pardon himself because of the fundamental rule that no one may be a judge in his own case. So now that has literally no precedental, meaning it has no precedent to it. It's not even like a legal opinion either, by the way. But that being said, all right, it's possible that most reasonable people would say that, yeah, that is not something that they can do, that they cannot pardon themselves. Now, the other question that is out there is whether or not President Biden can actually pardon a family member. Well, that's obvious that he has done so, but that is another unsettled question in terms of whether or not there is that limitation on the pardon power. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, and in the final minutes here of the show, the Supreme Court has, through the course of time, and believe me, there are court cases on this. This is a huge nuance. I mean, I'm not even close to doing it justice in 30 minutes. But the thing about it is that the Supreme Court has, generally speaking, fallen on the side of that the presidential pardon is relatively unlimited and extends has a very far reach. There is also some question, too, as to whether or not Congress could technically limit the presidential power, but that would take a constitutional amendment in order to do that properly. But there have been congressional legislation proposed to attempt to limit the president's power. And I think that they would, my guess is they would likely be struck down should something pass that would likely be struck down with the idea of the separation of powers clause, meaning that, again, the Congress can't tell the president what to do. The president can't tell Congress what to do, and neither one of those two can tell the Supreme Court what to do. So I honestly think that we're sort of in a constitutional crisis here, but I realistically don't think that this question is ever going to be answered, because I think most people are just going to agree with Hunter Biden. Now, the interesting thing about it is there are court cases. There was a court case in particular where a person decided he was granted a presidential pardon, and he decided not to accept it because accepting that pardon would mean that he would lose his Fifth Amendment rights. And the Supreme Court has upheld that that particular case would be true. But the Supreme Court has also upheld that as a further limit on the president's power is that the president, being a man, cannot take away any rights as part of punishment. So in other words, the president couldn't say, hey, I'm going to pardon you, but from now on, you can't vote. He can't do that. Or from now on, you can no longer have the right to bear arms. He can't do that because he is a man, and man's law does not supersede God's law. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. Again, the blanket pardon, kind of questionable, hasn't really been charged or tried. And so the date length, I think most people, though, most reasonable people look at that and they say that is an overuse or an abuse of power. All right, folks. That is it for me for this evening. Do not forget to come back tomorrow to meet with Captain Unicorn and our Christmas special. That occurs at 6 p.m. because Saturdays are an hour later, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on American Perspective. That's tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And do me a favor, if you haven't already, head on over to rumble.com, get yourself an account. It's free. And once you are signed up and signed in, follow the American Perspective channel by hitting that green follow button so you can get notified every time I go live. Also, too, before you take off, don't forget to hit those likes and thumbs up buttons across the board at all of my outlets, whether it's X, Facebook, YouTube, and, of course, Rumble, to help elevate these videos for a wider audience. We will see you tomorrow night. Have a great rest of your evening, and good night, everybody.
The previous broadcast was produced and is owned by Active Eye Media LLC. All rights reserved.